Hello, friends. This is Darren Hayes of Pigskin Dispatch.com. Before we take you to your favorite Sports History Network show, just want to tell you a little bit about some merch that you can pick up that represents your favorite SHN podcast. So far, there's t-shirts, coffee mugs, and even books from some of the authors that do podcasts right here on SHN. Who could buy something better than that than have the history right from the gentleman that you hear talking about it? But we also are adding things each and every day. And where's that store, may you ask? Well, it's at sportshistorynetwork.com. Up at the top, there is the SHN merch button. Click on that. It'll take you right to the store, and you can be representing your favorite podcast and show the world that, hey, on the swag that I'm using, it's the headquarters of sports yesteryear, Sports History Network, and my favorite podcaster, the Sports History Network store. Shop there today. It's time once again for our weekly visit from Timothy P. Brown from footballarchaeology.com. And today Tim brings us a special story from over 100 years ago of some gentlemen that played football for the Kentucky School of the Blind. And yes, they were sight impaired, and they had a great time. And Tim tells us their story in just a moment.
This is the Pigskin Daily History Dispatch, a podcast that covers the anniversaries of American football events throughout history on a day-to-day basis. Your host, Darren Hayes, is podcasting from America's North Shore to bring you the memories of the gridiron, one day at a time. So as we come out of the tunnel of the Sports History Network, let's take the field and go no huddle through the portal of positive gridiron history with PigskinDispatch.com.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com.
Hello, my football friends. This is Darren Hayes of PigskinDispatch.com. Welcome once again to the Pig Pen, your portal to positive football history. And we are going to portal back in time to football archaeology and Timothy P. Brown because it's Tuesday. And Tim's going to talk about a very interesting and unique school that played football so many years ago. Tim, welcome back to the Pig Pen.
Hey, Darren. Thank you once again. Glad to be here. And like we have a pretty cool story to talk about today.
Yeah, this one I had never heard before until I read your tidbit back on November 20th. And your title of that tidbit is really an eye catcher: Football at the Kentucky School for the Blind. And I said, okay, he's got to have some kind of a angle on this. It can't literally mean, this is a school for the blind, but I guess it was. So I'll let you explain it.
Yeah. Just the first thing I can even think about when because this actually did involve young men playing football who were blind. I mean, I just think it's just a story of courage, but it's also it's such a cool thing that these kids just wanted to play, and so Definitely. They found a way to play, and then obviously they had opponents, and all of their opponents were sighted teams. And so, anyways, it's just, kind of a cool thing. And so it's just, it's one of those, I mean, I remember, as a kid, I started playing football in, I guess, organized like sixth grade. We had a grade school team and then high school and da-da-da. And so, and there were times, if you're going, I was a late developer. And so, there's times when you're kind of intimidated, you're scared, in playing, or you're just, you just happen to be positioned against some 4,000-pound mammoth, and so it just takes guts to play the game. Right. And
absolutely,
but these kids were out there playing and they couldn't even see their opponents, And so it's just I just think it's it's remarkable that they were still willing to get out there and play, and so I guess the other thing for me is I think about it, tend to think about like accommodations for people with various types of disabilities or limitations of whatever sort, but they this story tells you that there were accommodations made back then too. So, and these may have, I think in some of the newspaper articles, it's clear that they did things like, the opponent had to run between the tackles or between the ends, right? When they were on offense.
Tim, if you don't mind, I'm not sure if we mentioned to the listener what time frame we're talking. We're talking 1904 to 1912. So this is 130, 120 years ago. So this is, so it's really fascinating that, it'd be remarkable in today's age, but this is really incredible for the game that they were playing back then too.
Yeah. I apologize for not mentioning that.
No problem.
I kind of had the picture of the players in my mind, but if you're just listening to the podcast, you don't see those pictures. But yeah. So I mean, these kids are, so like what they had the opposing team had to run between the tackles. They were if they were going to run the ball, then they made out a certain call. I think they just said hike, but if they were going to punt the ball, then they yelled punt. And so that the kids on defense would know what was going on. But and so it's kind of like, okay, well, how did these kids play? And the report suggests they kind of had a certain sense, right? That just as like defensive linemen, for instance, are taught to react to the pressure coming from the right or to the left, and kind of you resist the pressure, whatever direction it's coming from. And I'm sure they had developed a lot of that sense themselves, probably even before they started playing football. But so that was one of the things that they were able to just sense pressure. The other, I think, is as long as the ball had to be run between the tackles or between the ends, when these guys were on defense, then it's kind of more like, it's a little bit more like wrestling, or, so like, I wrestled when I was younger. And so I can see that being, it's easier to think of a blind wrestler being successful, right? Mm-hmm. Just because it's a sport of close quarters and very technique oriented, and you're physically grabbing one another, all the time. And so that makes sense to me. But football still just seems like crazy. It's like, how do you don't even know if somebody's coming at you until they come at you, right? And just tackling the ball player, or the ball carrier, it's kind of like they must have just like grabbed anybody that was coming, right? And yet they apparently were able. I mean, they won a bunch. They won like half their games.
It might be friendly fire. It might be your teammate going downfield. You're tackling.
That's right. Yeah, that's right.
You have a really interesting photo on footballarchaeology.com on this. And one of the challenges, and you've got me, so I'm looking at these photos a lot closer and trying to pick up things. And one thing I looked at, it had to be like challenge number one, is they're lining up. There's sort of a line on the field where these guys are lined up, and there's the far left end has his hands beyond the line. The ball's probably I don't know, a quarter of a yard shy of the line, and the right end's probably almost 2 yards deep off the line. So they're sort of cattywampus to the line. So probably staying on side, and I'm sure maybe I always look at it from an officiating lens for something, but trying to get these guys to line up so that they're legal formation.
Yeah.
They must have had some challenges there, I'm sure.
Yeah. So, I mean, I noticed that in that image too. And I was like, I'm not going to write anything about that. I'll leave that one alone. Just let everybody pick up on that themselves. But, so I think this is some of the accommodations, I think, was probably like when you were a kid and you were on the playground or at the park, half the time there'd be one team had 6 guys and the other team had 5, or one team had the best kid and everybody else stunk, or whatever. So
that's why you have the all-time quarterback, Tim.
Yeah, that's right.
That evens out the sides.
Yeah, but then there were, but these. So I just have to imagine there were things like where, like, when you were a kid, you negotiated that stuff with the other kids because you wanted it to be fair and competitive. Otherwise, it wasn't fun to play, right? So, they probably had something where there was a process where these guys got lined up correctly, so they're on side, and then they went from there. But still, just I think it's just kind of incredible story for these kids. And I think we mentioned it briefly on another previous podcast, but the Kentucky School for the Blind completed at least one forward pass in one of their games. And, which is just like nuts to think about.
That's amazing. Now, one part of this tidbit, you explain how they would kick extra points. And maybe if you could chat about that a little bit, because I thought that was really interesting.
Yeah. So what they did was they had, so back then, extra points were a free kick, right? So, and that meant there was no snap, no nothing. It was just, so.
Well,
so the one guy,
what we call a kickoff today is a free kick.
Yes.
Start each half, and after a score, that's a free kick. Just
or somebody. It's still part of the game. If you fair catch a punt, you have the legal right to kick the ball from there to try to get a field goal.
Correct.
And so, back then, the team that just scored, assuming they had scored near the middle of the field or near the goalpost, they could basically just walk it straight out as far back as they wanted to, and then kick it from there. So then once they would get the kicker and the holder lined up, then there was one of the teammates would stand between the goalposts and then behind them, and he would yell towards the kicker, and then two other teammates with sticks would hit the goalposts, and that the combination of those noises would allow the kicker to kind of center where he's trying to kick the ball. And apparently they made about half their field goals too, or extra points. So it just, again, sighted people didn't do that well with kicking accuracy back then. So it's actually pretty darn amazing what they did.
Definitely is. I thought that was great. It was a great story, especially like you said, the part where they completed a forward pass. That had to be so well timed. We talk about timing between a quarterback and a receiver now. You would have to put it right where a guy's expecting it, or at the right time, or
it had to be like a basket catch. You gotta believe, right?
Yeah. So that's great stuff. This is what makes these tidbits so interesting, because they're just such off the wall topics sometimes that you grab from an old newspaper or book or the postcards or whatever, and really makes for some interesting reading and makes you scratch your head sometimes and sit there in amazement like this one is, because these guys really did some amazing things. So really appreciate you chatting about that and sharing this with us. So
good story.
Yeah, definitely is. And Tim, maybe if you could share with the listeners where they too can pick up on some of the tidbits that you have each and every day, that'd be a great thing.
Yeah. So footballarchaeology.com is my website. I post a news story, or what I call a tidbit, every day at 7:00 Eastern. Periodically, I post other longer form stories as well. I also post it on Facebook, or not Facebook, but Twitter. And so, just a reminder, if you go find the site, you can, now there's, 400 some different articles sitting out there. So, just use a little magnifying glass to search whatever topic you want and see what's out there, and have at it. And if you like it, then sign up, subscribe, and you get the email every night at 7:00.
It's great stuff, and really makes your football brain work each and every night, and really enjoyable. So Tim Brown, thank you very much. Footballarchaeology.com is the site, and we'll talk to you again next Tuesday.
Okay, very good. Thank you, sir.
That's all the football history we have today, folks. Join us back tomorrow for more of your football history. We invite you to check out our website, pigskindispatch.com, not only to see the daily football history, but to experience positive football with our many articles on the good people of the game, as well as our own football comic strip, Cleat Marks Comics. Pigskindispatch.com is also on social media outlets, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and don't forget the Pigskin Dispatch YouTube channel to get all of your positive football news and history. Special thanks to the talents of Mike and Jean Monroe, as well as Jason Neff for letting us use their music during our podcast.
This podcast is part of the Sports History Network, your headquarters for the yesteryear of your favorite sport. You can learn more at sportshistorynetwork.com. Hey there, sports history fan. This is Arnie Chapman, a.k.a. the Football History Dude, and I hope that you enjoyed this recent episode presented by the Sports History Network and were able to learn some good old-fashioned sports history knowledge nuggets. I started the Sports History Network back in 2020 with the mission to help podcasters find a community of like-minded sports history nerds, as well as helping aspiring podcasters to start their own shows. We have a little bit over 30 shows on the network right now covering all sorts of sports history, but as far as I'm concerned, we're just at the toothpick in the ocean moment, that can't even figure it out because there's so much more coming. We wanted to create the ultimate headquarters for sports yesteryear, starting with Podcast Network and our website, but we're going to continue to move into other mediums as well. And here's the cool part, because we want you to be part of our team. So if you're interested in starting your own podcast, or maybe being a guest on one of our shows, or who knows, maybe even writing an article for us over on the website. Seriously, all you gotta do is reach out to us on the contact page over at sportshistorynetwork.com. You can be as technologically savvy as a Neanderthal tapping on a stone trying to figure out this whole hieroglyphics thing back in the day. Again, it doesn't matter, because even if you don't understand the whole podcast space, we have a production team that can pretty much help you out with doing everything. All you gotta do, head over to sportshistorynetwork.com, head to the contact page, fill it out. That message goes right to me, and I'll reach out to you as soon as I can. But for now, dude, I'm through if you're through.